everyone, thank you for tuning in. I'm Joyce, an account manager here at Krabu. I'm really pleased to introduce you to Laura Crimmons, the Communications Director at Branded 3. If you had any questions following this webinar, please don't hesitate to send us those via email or on Twitter, both to us at calq or to Laura directly, or as comments on the blog post or on the YouTube channel. And with that, I'll pass you over to Laura.
Thanks, Joyce. So today I'm going to be talking through how you can utilize data in your PR and content marketing strategy. I'm a bit of a data geek. I love as much data as I can get my hands on, both in terms of how I plan campaigns, what I use in my campaigns, and how I ultimately report on my campaigns. So data kind of runs through everything I do and everything I've always done kind of with Branded 3 campaign-wise. So that's why I thought I'd talk through this today. What I'm going to do is kind of go through, first of all, why data's really useful in PR and content marketing campaigns, what types of data there are out there that you can get your hands on. One of the things that clients often say is, oh yeah, we love all these big data campaigns, but we don't really have any of our own data and we don't have access to any, or if we do have data, it's too sensitive for us to share because our competitors can't get their hands on it. And that's normally not true. Yes, there is sensitive data that you cannot share. Every business has that. But there's other ways to acquire data and use data in campaigns without having to give away anything sensitive or just say no to the whole thing. Then I'm also going to go through kind of how you can use data to get smarter at planning campaigns, at kind of amplifying campaigns and that kind of stuff. And then also the types of data that you should be using in reporting on campaigns. One of my biggest bugbears that I talk about quite a lot is people that just measure campaigns by number of links that something got, or they use just kind of arbitrary link metrics that don't really add anything. How we should measure campaigns is according to real business goals and the bottom line. So I'll go through that as well. So without further ado, first of all, the reason that data is really useful in terms of the content of PR and content marketing campaigns has really grown from the rise of data journalism. Journalists want to write about data. Therefore, we as PRs, as content marketers, the best thing we can do is give them data. In terms of just quickly what data journalism is, there's various definitions around. This one I thought was quite a good one. So data journalism is a journalism specialty reflecting the increased role that numerical data is used in the production and distribution of information in the digital era. You can read that on the screen. Basically, it's all about how content producers, journalists, and us content marketers, PRs, are using data combined with various other fields, so design, but not just design, development, content writers, storytellers, combined with computer scientists and statistics to create really great stories and really great content pieces that people want to read and that people want to share and link to, which is why it's so great for us. So where do we get data? This is always the big question. The hardest thing with clients for me isn't selling in that we should use data in campaigns or we should, try and tap into data journalism. It's them saying, like I said, where can we get the data? We don't have any that we can just use off the top of our heads. So these are just some of the types of data that we use at Branded 3 with our clients' campaigns and that I see used quite a lot by other people. I'm going to go through them and go through where you can get each of these pieces of data, how easy it is, and then also just some case studies of them being used in practice. I always find that having the case studies to back it up is one of the easiest ways to convince someone that that's what you should do. If you can show that someone's done it before super successfully, then that generally works quite well. But just going through these types, so social media data, super useful, various ways that you can get hold of it. So there's Salesforce, Radian 6, Brandwatch, which we used to use and still love, and Crimson Hexagon, which happens to be the platform that we use at the moment. All of them very good, different benefits, all paid tools, those ones. but really useful for getting social media data that you can use in your campaigns. There's also lots of public data as well. So obviously social media data is public, but I've classed that off separately just because it is kind of different. So within public, I'm talking about things like freedom of information requests, which I find are often very much underused in terms of campaigns. I don't see that many people using it, and it's such a great tool because the best thing about it is it's absolutely free, which we all love to try and do things as cheaply as possible for our clients' budgets. We can spend more time invested in the actual promotion and creation of the content that we want to produce. So freedom of information requests are great, and the other great thing about a freedom of information request is that it's a source that journalists use themselves. So in terms of when you're then selling the campaign in, they know it's trusted data because it's the kind of thing that they use to create their own stories as well. So it's not as much of a hard sell for you. You've just kind of done that bit of work for them. Google has various forms of public data. So there's Google Public Data, which is one of the sources. And then there's also things like Google Trends, which can be really useful as well. And then there's ONS, so Office for National Statistics in the UK. There's also data.gov.uk, which has really great public data as well, which I'll go through. And then there's your own business data. So this is the stuff that's often a bit more difficult for businesses to kind of get their heads around why they should release this. So you've got things like customer data. I don't mean releasing your customers' email addresses and phone numbers, obviously, but details around like who the customers are for particular products, for example, or services. That can be quite interesting in terms of mapping trends, purchase data, especially geographically. That can be really interesting. So not giving away anything that's violating data protection, but just stuff that's interesting and can give us good trends. Often I find businesses are sitting on a wealth of data that's really interesting to us as consumers and journalists in terms of crafting stories, that they just don't realise how good that data is. And again, I've got examples of that coming up. And then there's the type of purchase. So it's not freely available for you, but you can buy it yourself. The benefit of this is that you're going to get exactly what you want, which is kind of perfect. If you're using any of the others, so social media, public or business, you're restricted by what already exists, what's out there, and you can't really control. If you wanted a stat that proves, you know, a certain hypothesis and there's no data for that, you can't change the data to do what you want. Or if the data's out there but you want to be able to show it split by age range and it doesn't have that split, you can't change it. Whereas if you're purchasing the data, generally you can. Two ways that I've got down here, so purchasing third-party data, and sometimes that could be, for example, pulling through a third-party API into a content piece that you're doing because they've got something that's valuable, or it can be doing something as simple as a survey. There's various providers. Again, I'll go through those and show how that can be used. But yeah, that's the big benefit of that, is that you're going to get exactly what you want because you're paying for it. And then there's data that you can create yourself, which is separated out from purchase, even though it's kind of similar in that you're going to get exactly what you want, but you're not necessarily paying for the data. So this is by doing things like quizzes and polls, where you're creating something engaging that people do want to, you know, play or answer the questions, but then ultimately you're collecting the data behind that to be able to use. We use that tactic quite a lot and find it very successful. So that's some of the types of data that we use in our PR and content marketing campaigns. What I'll do now is just go through them individually, talk through the different tools that are out there for us to access this, and then, like I said, some case studies that kind of put this into practice and show what we've done that I can talk through, obviously, at much greater detail, but also what we've seen some other companies do, which has been pretty cool as well. So starting off with social media, as I said, Crimson Hexagon is the tool that we use at the moment, but Brandwatch, Radian6 do very similar things. It just depends on kind of what you've got your hands on. But this can be really useful because when you think about, so there's various studies done in terms of what journalists want, what makes a good story. There's some really good research on that. And one of the things that always makes something more shareable and makes journalists want to write about it is if something's trending, the proximity it has to a trending topic. And social media data is great for giving us that, because that's essentially what it's all about. You can easily find out what's trending, when it started trending, where it started trending, who's interested. and everything like that. So in this, we can look at topics. We can answer all the who, what, why, where, when questions. So we can look at how many people are talking about something. Within that, we can look at comparisons, obviously. So, I don't know, say the US election at the moment, how many people are talking about Hillary versus Trump? Where are people talking about it? And again, split that down. So where are people most talking about Hillary? Where are people most talking about Trump? When people are talking about it, so looking at the spikes around the various stories that break out, the things that are featured in the press, how they spike in terms of mentions, also the official things like the debates that take place, and really who the people are that are talking about it. So who is in terms of age, in terms of gender, in terms of geographic location, all that kind of data can be really useful. We can also then look at kind of what platform they're talking about it on. Is it more popular on Twitter or Instagram or Tumblr, forums, that kind of thing. And most popular hashtags also can be really useful to look at. Sentiment, so again, coming back to the election example, you know, what's the sentiment for Hillary versus Trump? You would probably guess that it would be more positive towards Hillary, a more negative sentiment coming up against Trump. You could then test that hypothesis by using social media data to see whether that is actually the case. And then associated topics and terms. So that can be really useful to represent and really interesting. But what it can also do is show you other themes that you might want to explore within kind of what you're doing. So say if your idea was to create a campaign around baking, and then you see that there's various associated terms around pies in particular, or a certain type of cake, that can be extra content that you then start to add on there. So really simple to set up, loads of great uses for it. An example of that, so this is kind of an old one, but I thought I'd put it in because obviously we are in the middle of the US election again at the moment. And this was done by, so Topsy does various social analytics as well. This was covered on Mashable. And this was looking at whether social media, Twitter in particular, could predict the outcome of the US election. So this is showing where Obama's leading in terms of the various swing states and where Romney was leading right up until the day of the election. And you can see that it does kind of all flip up towards the end in terms of Obama leading. And obviously he did win. So that was the story, was all about how social media had managed to predict that, with most of the swing states talking about the fact that they were going to vote for Obama. So that's one interesting use of social media in a campaign and in content. This one's slightly different. The topic, one much closer to my heart because it's about food. This was done by Q Photo World, and this was looking at where the food capitals are of Instagram. So this looked at the top 5 cities that were Instagramming food, looking at what types of food they were talking about in the various places. So it's just pulling through that social media data and just displaying it in an interesting way. As you can see, this screenshot is looking at all the different people talking about bacon, which is lovely, and is actually making me quite hungry. So I'll move on from that one. And this one was done from Brandwatch, another food one. You can tell a theme here with me. But this is looking at the Great British Bake Off and looking at how many people were talking about it, and also then mapping that to the events that unfolded through the show. So you can look, there's the peak excitement for the new season, you can see all the different events that happened throughout it. So when Paul got told off, Star Baker and person leaving announced, you can look at the trend of how the tweets happen throughout the show, throughout the episode. You can also then look at who was the most mentioned contestant. So you can see on this, Salisbury was the most mentioned in season 7, episode 1. Things like that are what's used to predict who's going to win, and look at trends like that. So all great social data that's actually quite interesting for people to look at, and all readily available if you've got the right tool to be able to track it. So moving on to public data, again, various sources of this. So Office for National Statistics is one of my favourite websites. I find it a bit like a rabbit hole where you go on that and you start looking at one thing, and then you find that there's some more data that's really interesting, and then you find some more related data, and before you know it, you've wasted hours just looking at various pieces of data. So don't do that, but be more specific. So within this, you can search for a specific set of data. So if you know exactly what you want, or you know exactly what you want it to relate to, you can search for that. Otherwise, you can browse, which is what I do, where you click through the different industries and different data sets and can get lost for hours. So as a warning, be careful how much time you spend on there. They also have a release calendar. So if you're kind of planning your content calendar or your PR calendar ahead, and you want to look at what data might be becoming available that you might want to use, that's on there, really useful to check out. You can see just at the top right, it says release calendar, have a look through there. It'll also show you when data has been released. And if there's certain data that you want to request, you can request that data as well, if there's not something that's already there. So really useful website, all publicly available data, relating to all sorts of industries. So there's normally something that you can attribute to a client in there. Data.gov.uk is very similar to that. Again, you can browse or request data on a range of topics. Like I say, very similar, not that much to say on that. Google, so both the Google public data, which pulls through various different data sets. So that actually pulls through some of the data sets on data.gov.uk, but it also pulls through a range of others as well. And again, you can browse through reports on there, or you can search as well if there's something in particular that you want to look at. So really useful thing to have a look at. Google Trends also really interesting to take a look at, looking at trends for particular topics and keywords over time. So if there's something that's trending at the moment, so for example, we were looking before at the whole clown trend, the killer clowns on the loose. If you take a look in Google Trends, one of the girls carrying my team was looking at that, and there's been a massive spike in terms of people searching for clown masks and things like that after that. Not the best trend to see, but there's various other ones we can look at that are great. Within this, again, we can look at related queries. So we can look at, there was a piece done recently on what Europeans think of Brits, and they did that by looking at Google Trends data and then looking at the associated queries that people say in France were searching for about Brits. And again, you can also see geographic spread, so you can either see that kind of worldwide where people are talking about this particular topic, or like for this one, which I think I've put for Clinton versus Trump, look at it in terms of states and where they're talking about each candidate. Google actually did use their own data to do this. So this was for Brexit. They released this graph, which was showing searches for leave the EU and searches for stay over the 7 days prior to the referendum. And as you can see, they think that they did predict it because it was overwhelmingly red, which was the leave vote. And that was something that Google released and was then picked up by various places. So this was taken from Wired. It was on various publications like The Express and different national newspapers as well, because there was the whole thing where people said no one really predicted that we'd actually leave, and then it was such a shock on the day, whereas Google was saying they predicted it all along. And what do they know and Ask the EU are really useful for, so they're essentially to help you with freedom of information requests, which can be quite a lot to get your head around. I remember when I first did one, it was before I knew about these websites, and it took me ages. So I knew the data that I wanted to get, but finding all of the different contact details that every local authority that I needed to get in contact with to request the information and managing all the responses to that took me ages. Whereas these two sites, what do they know for UK requests and Ask the EU for EU requests, kind of does it all for you. So I wish I'd known about it when I was doing the first one. But this allows you to either browse existing freedom of information requests that have already been answered or at least replied to, and it also allows you to easily file a new freedom of information request. So quite useful if you're thinking about something and you want to check whether someone's already found that data or requested that data to save you doing the same thing. Really useful, and then also a really easy process for you to file your own request, and it'll remind you if you've not got responses and things like that. So really helpful services. This is an example from the NSPCC of using freedom of information request in their own campaign. So this was looking at Sarah's Law, which is all around children's sexual abuse. and they did a freedom of information request to find out how many applications under the scheme had actually been successful in England and Wales, and they found that only 1 in 6 applications had been successful, despite the fact that thousands of requests were being made, which is obviously a really powerful stat for them to go out to journalists with, and like I say, it's a trusted source. You're getting it directly from the parties involved. So that's a great example of a freedom of information request being used. And then there's various other sites. This section could have kind of gone on forever, but the last one that I was going to include was just Statista. Again, quite similar to the others, you can either browse through different things or you can search for specific data. This will bring back various formats. It'll bring you back stats, it'll bring back studies, it'll even bring back infographics that already exist. So you can take a look through that and see what's available. Those ones sometimes are paid within there. Some are free, some are paid, as a warning. So business data. So this, like I said, is always the stickler where people are like, I don't want to release business data. It's too sensitive. In terms of where you get it, if you are thinking about doing it, obviously your CRM system, your sales system, whatever you've got in place is kind of the place to go. Looking at sales data, mapping it to trends can be really useful. Looking at customer data, see who's inquiring or viewing your products, and usage data. So see if there's any trends with when your product or service is being used. If there's certain times of the day or the week that would actually make an interesting story. Not necessarily sensitive data, your competitors would likely be seeing the same thing, but it could be something interesting to go out with. This is probably one of the first examples that I saw that was really great of a brand using their own data. A lot of you may have already seen it before. This was Lovehoney UK sex map. It's years old and they've actually taken it down from the site now. But this was really simple, so using a map to plot where people, where their customers were buying certain adult items from their website. So you could have a look at your area and see what the top products were in your area and where were the capitals for certain things, which got them loads of links and loads of coverage. It was really clever. We've also done this for a range of clients. So we have had clients that would give us data. This is an example from Transform, who were a cosmetic surgery client. What we used for them wasn't business sensitive data. So instead of using their actual sales figures, what we did was map inquiries. So we looked at the last 4 years of their inquiry data and mapped it across the UK, looking at what procedures were most popular in different areas. The reason that this whole project came around was they wanted to do some brand messaging around the fact that you shouldn't be ashamed of wanting cosmetic surgery necessarily. You know, if you're thinking about getting a tummy tuck, you might think you're the only person in your area that's doing that, but actually there's loads of people that are interested in tummy tucks. You're not the only unconfident person, and actually that's okay. So it's quite a positive message that we wanted to get across. So we thought by showing how many other people in that area had also inquired about this, and also showing them a case study of someone in that area that's had that procedure, it helps you to get a better understanding of what the experience might be like and whether it is right for you to then inquire about it yourself. So this got a load of great traffic to their website, a load of conversions. From the conversions alone, it paid for itself. And it was really interesting to journalists. So people like Mail Online, The Sun, Daily Star, all the kind of tabloid titles that their target audience are reading were interested in covering it. We actually did an exclusive launch with The Sun on Sunday, whereby it went into print and went online, and it worked really well because it is interesting data. And the main thing that we were able to do with that, because it was our own data, is kind of split it however we needed to. So we had one story, so one angle from the story was where were the capitals for different procedures around the UK. So as you can see, Blackpool came out as the capital for boob operations in the UK. So that was one angle that was really great. But we could give each regional newspaper the stats for their exact region. We also had other stats, so we could then cut the data by age and look at any trends by age. So from that we could see quite a worrying stat emerging that one of the top age groups for inquiring about facelifts was actually 18 to 24-year-olds. which is worrying because at 18 to 24, you haven't even really grown into your facelift yet. So you really shouldn't be inquiring about facelifts. So that was something to kind of highlight in terms of people's views of their bodies, in terms of raising awareness of that. And then there was also celeb trends that we could map. So we looked at when inquiries for certain procedures spiked, and looked at things like when Wayne Rooney had his hair transplant years ago, and there was then a massive spike from men inquiring for hair transplants. So various different ways we could cut the data to be able to get different angles that would appeal to different types of publications, which proved really useful. Another example of doing this, definitely a different niche, was with PayPlan. They're debt management experts. They help people to kind of freeze the credit that they're paying and put together a management plan that's actually affordable. Their brand messaging was kind of similar in that you're not alone in debt. So a lot of people think that, again, they're the only one that's in debt and they don't know what to do, they don't know where to turn, they're a bit ashamed. And what we wanted to do with this was, again, just show that you're not alone. There's plenty of people around you that are also struggling at the moment. You know, we went through a recession, of course there's people in debt. And what we also wanted to do was show the trend over time in terms of when people were seeking debt advice. So what this did was, again, mapped across the UK using their data of when people were seeking debt advice. And you could see it as a month trend, a 3-month trend, and a 12-month trend. It showed what the average debt level was, how much was unsecured, how much was secured, and yeah, figures for people that were seeking advice. Again, people were interested, lots of page views, people were spending a lot of time on the site, and all the big kind of journalists that we want to get links from and get coverage from were covering it. So Telegraph Mail online, also kind of industry publications like Credit Today. Lots of interest in this, which helped to support the overall messaging, and showed, again, it showed like the hotspots of the UK for debt advice, so that people could get help in those areas. And we also featured advice from PayPlan's experts in terms of if you feel like you do need to know about that advice, what you should do, which worked really well for them. Next up, purchase data. So various ways in which you can do that. Surveys are probably one of the biggest. Again, various survey companies out there. We use OnePoll as our default, purely because, again, we know that journalists trust it, but we've also worked with Google Consumer Surveys, the Leadership Factor, and YouGov. All great ones. There's probably more that I could have put on there. Said it earlier, the reason that surveys are so good is that you can target the exact audience that you want to acquire data on, and you can ask them within reason anything that you want to ask them. So you're not relying on the data that you've already managed to capture. You're capturing exactly what you need. Another option for this is acquiring third-party data. This example isn't from us purchasing data. It was data that was already released by Visa Europe, but it's showing using third-party data to inform something. This was Black Friday back in 2014. We saw a prediction from Visa Europe in terms of how much money was going to be spent per minute on Black Friday, and we thought that was kind of interesting. So we created this asset, which essentially was a live counter. So if you logged onto it all through Black Friday in 2014, you could see the counter going up in terms of how much was spent. This was the overall figure that it ended up on. Again, really interesting. We're just visualizing data in a different way for people rather than just saying this much per minute. It's an asset where people can go on and look at, oh gosh, by this point, people have already spent this amount of money. That's insane. So again, lots of interest, Guardian, Telegraph, BBC, and loads of people interested in seeing this data displayed in a nice way. And then there's creating your own data. Again, various ways in which you can do this. One of our most common ways that we use is by creating quizzes for our clients. The reason that we find this works so well as a campaign tactic is it gives you kind of 2 bites of the cherry, as it were. So you've got the initial launch of the quiz that you can go out with. So the fact that you've launched this quiz and it's testing X, Y, Z, and shouldn't people engage with it because it's lovely. But then you've got, once you've had enough people play that quiz, you've then got the data that it's given you. So a few examples of this. For Halford's Autocentres, they wanted to do something around their road users coming up to MOT season. So we started thinking about what conversations there are that people do get quite passionate about. And one of the things is always the one around, would you still pass your driving test? So say if you passed your test 5 years ago, do you think you could still pass it today? A lot of people talk about the fact that you're not learning to drive, you're learning to pass your test, and then you learn to drive after you've done that. And so what we did is decided we put a quiz together, basically using the Green Cross code, to see whether people could still pass their test and how roadworthy they are, i.e. should they still be on the road. We captured various data in there, so we looked at how long people had been driving for so that we could see at what point your knowledge starts to decrease. We also looked at age, we looked at region, to be able to, again, offer up those different cross-sections. Loads of page views, a huge chunk of those came from the fact that the Daily Mail featured it and embedded it and sent a load of traffic our way. Loads of assisted conversions, which is great in terms of people actually then inquiring about an MOT. And over 2 minutes spent on average per visit, which is a great amount of time. In terms of who was covering it, again, it's the big sites that we want to be linking and talking about it. Mail Online, Sun, Edge, various people that drove a load of links and a load of traffic because it's data that is interesting. We're taking part in a conversation that people have an interest in. One of our most earliest examples of this was a quiz we did for Ladbrokes called How Well Do You Know Your Team? This was born out of the kind of conversations that I used to hear from the guys at work talking about Glory supporters and the fact that, oh, you support Man U, but you're not from Man U, you're a Glory supporter. So we put this quiz together, which essentially you select the Premier League team that you support, you answer 10 questions about them, and then you were given a score. We then took the average score for each team and mapped it in an alternative Premier League table. So essentially we could look at who was actually top of the Premier League table and whose fans were top for knowledge. We did a lot of seeding through, we worked with a lot of football forums and football fan sites and influencers to drive people to actually take the quiz. And then we used the data from that in order to get our links and our coverage. So for example, at the time that we went out with this, Palace were bottom of the actual Premier League, but their fans managed to be top of our league table in terms of knowledge, which was a great headline in itself, which the Metro decided to use. We also could play on the regional rivalries between football teams. For example, Liverpool versus Everton. We could compare how their fans did knowledge-wise, and we could even drill down into the particular questions that their fans did know the answer to or didn't know the answer to. The Telegraph even covered this twice because they found it so interesting with the different angles. And it got loads of social engagement. It did really well. So that's kind of examples of the types of data that you can use to inform your campaigns and create them based on. But then what kind of data should you be reporting on? As I said at the start, one of my biggest pet peeves is people that try and measure by pointless link metrics or by number of links and things like that. I've talked about it quite a lot before, but you shouldn't be measuring just output. It should be the outcome that you were looking for. These are some of the things that we tend to look at. So traffic, so the amount of traffic overall that was attracted to the campaign page, but also we'd like to look at what percentage of that came from the links that we acquired and what percentage came from, say, Google, from people just browsing the rest of the site, various different referrers, because that's quite interesting to take a look at. Conversions, both direct and assisted conversions, so we can see whether it actually made people want to take the next step with our client, be that buy something online, if it's e-commerce, book something, anything like that. It's really interesting to look at in terms of being able to report ROI. Search hit lists, so a lot of these campaigns are done with an SEO objective in mind, so looking at improvements in visibility, rankings, or whatever the KPI is that you're using for search. And then also social engagement, less of a tangible one, but it helps us to measure how engaging a campaign was, and it's useful to report back on, to learn from, and then use in the next campaign. So if not many people actually wanted to share it, Why was that? Is it that it's quite a sensitive campaign? For example, the cosmetic surgery one and the debt one. Well, not many people did want to share that because not many people want to admit to their friends and family straight away that they're thinking about cosmetic surgery or that they're in debt. So we always expected that wouldn't. But things like the quiz, people do generally want to boast about the scores that they get, so we do expect a high level of social engagement with those kind of things. So this is the kind of data that we like to report back on. But then you can also use the data to make you get smarter about the way that you run campaigns and the types of campaigns that you run. These are some examples of the kind of data that we track. I keep a track of this for all the campaigns that we run at Branded 3 so that we can then do things like planning better for campaigns. So we can look at all the different types of campaigns that we run and what type of response rate they get from journalists and from bloggers, and then also what that converts to in terms of success rate. So from contacting, 100 journalists, how many links did we then get, or how much coverage did we then get? Because sometimes if you just kind of track the end number and don't think about how many people you had to contact to get that, it's hard to know whether it was successful, and because people were really interested in it, or because you kept hammering enough people until you kind of got there in the end. Traffic and conversions, top referrers, really useful in terms of making smarter decisions about where to spend budget. If you look at the social engagement by channel and the top referrers, you can start to think about, if you are going to put budget behind social promotion, look at where it worked for campaigns previously and then spend more in those areas. Don't invest where you're not going to get the engagement. And then finally, in terms of setting well-informed KPIs, obviously you've got to start from somewhere for campaigns. But say if you've run 5 quizzes before, you'll start to know on average what type of link number, what type of social number, what type of traffic number you get. So you can set better KPIs that are more achievable and realistic. So it's really important to do that. This is a great article that I recommend anyone taking a look at, which was done by Moz and Fractal, which are an agency over in the US. And this is some analysis that they did on 300 plus of their own content marketing campaigns to determine what they thought it taught them about earning links. And it looked at the fact that if it had an emotional angle, it tended to be really powerful. If it had like pop culture references, so they're really great. And they've again got some great case studies of campaigns that they've run that hopefully give you some inspiration in terms of what you can do as well. So in summary, saying you don't have data isn't an excuse. As I've shown, it's easy to acquire some. It can make a fantastic campaign if you do so. So just have a think about what data would be interesting for your audience and relevant to your brand. Data can really add to a story and make a great headline. The important thing that I'm talking about here is that data can add to a story, but it doesn't necessarily make the whole story. I know I've talked only about data in here, but the important thing is to attach the human element as well. So do that through case studies or through anecdotes or things like that that make it relevant to people. Data in isolation isn't great. Don't report on irrelevant data. Think about what has business impact. So not reporting a number of links or just link metrics, looking at what that actually achieved. And then tracking your own data. Make sure that you don't just run endless campaigns and don't actually review them to see what you've learned. You can get smarter and learn from it. And that was everything from me. Thank you.